BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. Here's round one. For 2 marks, I want to know the meaning of the following words, beginning with Anne Scott James. Anne, what's the meaning of Scrimshaw? S-C-R-I-M-S-H-A-W, all one word.
Oh, yes, it's a collection of small objects.
Yes, you could, if you liked it that way. Scrimshaw, it can be a verb. It means to adorn shells or bits of ivory and other things with carving or with coloured designs. And these were supposed to be done, in fact were done, for sailors to while away idle hours at sea, and you do find them in antique shops. Frank Muir, what is Pelota? P-E-L-O-T-A.
I play football fairly frequently on Sunday mornings with a small Spanish lad of 4 named Jaimito, and when he wants the ball, he says, Pelota, Pelota.
Yes, he would, yes.
Gracias. When he gets it. So it's Spanish for ball.
Absolutely right. Well done, Frank. Pelota, it's the Basque province of Spain, and it's a game rather like fives or a bit like tennis. It is the Spanish for a ball. Dilys Powell, what's the meaning of cabochon? C-A-B-O-C-H-O-N, cabochon.
It's applied to jewellery.
And how do you apply it?
A large diamond, or something of the sort.
But how does it appear?
Square, is it? Square? It's the centrepiece of a necklace.
Yes. Cabochon is a gem which is polished, but it isn't shaped or faceted as you normally find diamonds and engagement rings and things. So an emerald en cabochon is a gem treated in that way, and it just is the French, and after that, before that, the Italian word for head. It's very much the same as cabbage, in fact, which is a sort of headed vegetable. Denis Norden, what's the meaning of Tigon? T-I-G-O-N.
Well, if, when wearing a lounge suit, you lean too near a rotary mower, what I know is it's something to do with the tiger, I should think.
Yes.
It's like a tiger who's had an affair with what? Something that ends in O-N. Lion. A lion. A tiger who's had an affair with a lion. The result is a tigon.
You've fought your way home. It's exactly what it is. A tigon is the offspring of a tiger and a lioness.
They couldn't do it. It's
They do
biologically impossible.
Yeah, they've done it in the zoological gardens in London. Too much. Before we begin round 2, I shall read out a quotation for each team to write down, and then I want the 2 women members to study them, because at the end of the programme, I shall ask them where the 2 quotations come from. Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, your quotation is, you must take the rough with the smooth, and Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, yours is, half a loaf is better than no bread. And then in the last round of the programme, I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their idea of how these came to be said or written. Now, here's round 2. And this is about the author of the week. I want the author to be identified, and shall then ask some questions about the author and works. 2 marks for each correct answer, and here's a quotation to help. The years at the spring and days at the morn, mornings at 7, the hillsides dew-pearled, the larks on the wing, the snails on the thorn, God's in his heaven, all's right with the world. Now, Anne Scott James, who is the author, and in which of the poems will you find that song?
Well, the author is Browning.
Yes? The poem?
The poem is Pippa.
Well done. 2 marks. Robert Browning, and the poem is Pippa Passing. Pippa passes, rather. Frank Muir, who was Pippa, and what did her singing as she passed by do to certain citizens in the town?
Oh, Pippa was a figment of Robert Browning's imagination.
That's a good start.
She was a girl child.
Yes.
Poor. She had a holiday once a year when she went to another place. I'm not quite sure where the first place, a factory, a cigarette factory or...
A factory?
And then she went on holiday and she sang. And she waltzed through the street, if you please, and sang an In Pippa Passes, which is a long, dramatic poem. It describes how she sang 4 songs and influenced 4 sets of people to the good.
Yes, well done. Dilys Powell, Browning commented on another of his own poems years after he'd written it. When I wrote, God and I knew what it meant. Now God alone knows.
Well, Grammarian's Funeral.
And that's a good idea, but it's not all that difficult, that one.
Yeah?
It's about the wars between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. I don't know if that helps at all.
It doesn't help me.
No, it's Sordello, which is a long and terribly involved story, and the first line begins very optimistically, who will may hear Sordello's story told, and the last line of all is, who would has heard Sordello's story told, but not very many readers are that much the wiser at the end of the poem. Now, Denis Norden, Elizabeth Barrett wrote a sequence of passionate poems about her love for Robert Browning and his for her, but she didn't dare to publish them as directly autobiographical. Do you remember what artifice she used and the name she gave the poems?
Yes. She wrote these rather fevered poems, like which had lines which weren't very proper for a young lady of the time, like, how do I love thee? Let me count the ways. Or there was an even more provoking one that I always remember from school. What is he doing, the great god Pan, down in the reeds by the river? And so she called them sonnets from the Portuguese, and put it about that they were translations from a Portuguese poet of the time whose name escapes me. It was rather like Camus, but it wasn't.
Camoens.
Camoens. Yeah.
Well done. That's 2 marks, yes. They did, in fact, to some extent derive from the Portuguese original, but they were written about her and Robert Browning. Well, now a round of differences. What I want the 2 teams to do is to define the differences in meaning between the following pairs of fairly similar-sounding words, and again 2 marks each time. Anne Scott James, Parasang and Parasite.
Well, a parasite is something which sits upon or sort of clings or feeds upon something else.
Yes.
And a parasang is something, either something to do with blood or else it's an Australian weapon.
Anne, you've forgotten your Xenophon.
Forgotten yours. I told you to bring it.
Oh, wait a minute.
How are we going to get home?
Now
You'll have to go on my crossbar now.
On the Anabasis, which was the way up to the sea.
Yes.
What did they do with their parasangs?
They marched them.
They marched along.
The Bois de Boulogne. With an independent air.
Definitely not. They marched along through the Persian mountains with some kind of a shoe.
They marched so many parasangs.
Oh, yes, you're so right. It was a kind of Near Eastern mile.
Yes, I'll give you another bit if you say how long it was.
Well, something between a furlong and 3 miles.
Jolly good shot. Parasang was an ancient Persian measure of distance, and it was 3 1/4 miles or thereabouts. And Xenophon, when he led his 10,000 men up to near Trebizond on the Black Sea, marched so many parasangs every day. Now, I don't know what to mark you on this one. I think probably 1.
Oh, I thought I was going to get a bonus mark.
You only hit the jackpot.
And a parasite is an interested hanger-on or toady in human terms, or in botanical, a plant or animal that lives in or on another and draws its nourishment directly from the thing it's living on. Frank Muir, Loricate and Lorikeet.
Keat is having the attributes of, isn't it, or the qualities of.
Yes, that's perfectly
well,
true.
you know,
Yes, that's right. It is right.
Do you know Lorry?
No, I don't.
Try the Lorikeet.
The Lorikeet is a parrot.
Yes.
Brought by transport.
Parrot, all right. Yeah. I'm not saying about the transport.
No,
Well, it's a parakeet.
It's a parakeet.
It's a parakeet.
It's like a parakeet, yes. Loricate is an adjective in zoology. It means having defensive armour of bone or plates or scales. And it's a Latin word. Loricatus means equipped with a cuirass. And Lorikeet is a small, brightly coloured Polynesian parrot allied to the lory. It's a diminutive like parakeet. 1.5. Dennis Powell, factitious and fictitious.
Fictitious is concerned with fiction,
Yeah.
like most of my answers. It's an invented, applied to an invented story.
Yes. And factitious.
Factitious is kind of false, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes, it's false.
Yes, false is not absolutely dead right.
Well, it's not invented, not dead right.
Well,
Yes, it is, isn't it? Yes, fictitious.
a lady with false bosoms, they're factitious, whereas a gentleman's a fictitious.
I give you 2 marks at once. That's a beautiful illustration. Fictitious is not genuine, imaginary, of novels or in novels. Factitious is artificial, not natural, designedly got up. So that Frank's was a beautiful example. Denis Norden, presumptive and presumptuous.
Well, presumptive is means you're nearly there, except for one in other words, an heir presumptive is a chap who owns all the estate coming to him, were it not for the one small technicality of the old man not being dead yet.
Well, there's always a little boy born when the father's 95,
Yeah.
and the heir presumptive is full of hope.
That's right.
Presumptuous would be what a young Victorian man would be labelled if he tried to kiss a girl when he'd only known her for 8 years.
Beautiful definition, 2 marks. Presumptive means giving grounds for the presumption or belief, and presumptive heir is exactly as Denis has said. He may lose his right of inheritance by the awkward arrival of somebody else's baby. Presumptuous is arrogant, forward, bit of a nuisance, too confident, so on. 2 marks. Now we come to the last round and go back to those 2 quotations I gave the teams earlier in the programme. For 2 marks, Anne Scott James, can you give me the origin of your quotation, which was, "You must take the rough with the smooth"?
Well, I can give you an origin. It was said by Tony Jacklin when he went into a bunker. That's the only person to whom it's been can be authentically attributed. But of course, if you'd like to go back to your old proverb books,
I can't prove you...
such as Haywood's Proverbs or a little further back still, pray do so.
I don't think I have any need to. I think I can't say anything other than it was a proverb in the 15th century, and it comes in the Early English Text Society collection, "Take your part as it cometh, of rough and eke of smooth." So you get your 2 marks. Dennis Powell, the origin of yours, please. "Half a loaf is better than no bread."
Another proverb.
Collection, like to say which it is?
Ray. Try Ray.
Try Ray.
Then Herbert. Then
It's certainly in Ray. I don't
the
know if I have
Oxford Dictionary of English Proverbs.
Half a loaf is better than no bread. It is. It's an early proverb, probably, I think, Latin before that. 2 marks. Now I'm going to ask Denis and Frank to give me their explanations of how these particular quotations came into being. So back to Denis Norden and his quotation. "You must take the rough with the smooth."
Some time ago, when a newspaper rang me up and asked, "Are you in favour of the Commission on Pornography?" I replied very firmly, "I am." Now, the reason why I was so fervent about it was at that very moment I was myself the owner of a huge packing case filled to the brim with pornography. Let me hasten to add, I was the unwitting and unwilling owner. You see, what had happened was, we just moved into this house, this new house. and the moving men had been paid off, and they'd thanked them, and I'd taken everything out of the crates, and I'd put it away neatly on the shelves and in the cupboards and so on, put the crates outside the back door to be collected later, come back into the drawing room, and there stood one crate still unsealed and unpacked. And I thought to myself, well, I wonder what was in this. Well, when you move house, you seem to get possessed by a kind of manic energy. So I just picked up this crate and tilted it onto the drawing room floor. And out of it tumbled over 500 filthy books and magazines. Dropping to my knees, I leafed through them in absolute disbelief for about an hour and a half. And at the end of that time, I was in a complete muck sweat. Printed in Copenhagen they were, all of them. And some of the goings-on which they described, I can only tell you that I have not touched Danish bacon since. Now, obviously, what had happened is there'd been some kind of hideous mistake. This was an illicit packing case of filth, which the moving men had left at my new house in Eyre. And I was kneeling there with all this stuff spread out around me on the floor, and I just about worked that out when the door opened, and in she came, my mother-in-law. She didn't have to leave quick. And in about 2 minutes, her daughter came in. You promised me you'd given that up. No, I said, no, it's a sort of hideous mistake. She said, I don't know if it's possible to have a sotto voce scream, but if it is, she managed it. She said, get it out of here. So I said, where? She said, anywhere, put it in the loft. Now, if you've ever wondered why they call it hardcore pornography, you want to try carrying a crate of it up a loft ladder. By the time I got it into the loft, I was about as out of breath and sagging at the knees as that elderly viscount in the last chapter of Rampant Thighs. That was a good one. What the point I'm making is that when I got into bed that night, there was this note on my pillow. I am not staying in this house while that filth is here. And the adjoining pillow was unoccupied. Obviously, there was only one thing I possibly could do, and that was to burn it, there and then, in the loft. So I poured some paraffin over the packing case and tossed a match in. There was nothing else I could do. You can spot our new house very easily. It's the one with the great gaping hole in the roof. But you see, that is the price that you have to pay if you're trying to get rid of porno. As the old proverb used to say, you must take the roof with the smut.
A sad fate to overtake a puritanical character like Denis. So we'll go on to Frank Muir, and if you remember, his quotation was, half a loaf is better than no bread.
Oh, believe me, life is not all caviar and beer, being Bimbo the Clown. Lots of you may have seen me. I'm the funny little chap with the baggy trousers and the ginger hair and the moustache that goes round and round. It isn't all that much fun being Bimbo the Clown, and I thought, really, I should settle down and get wed. So I spoke to the fat lady, Rumpo. She was the first woman on whom I've ever pressed my suit. There's no room for ironing boards in our caravan. And she's a very lovely lady, very docile. So I said, Rumpo, would you like to come to Brighton on Sunday, our day off? And she said, I'd love to. And I've got a little Mini. So I hired a van, and we had a lovely, lovely day at Brighton, and she was like a little girl, and she ran along the beach and played, and we even played seesaw in the children's park. There was she on one end and me and the van on the other. And I said to her, Rumpo, how would you visualise being wedded to me and being Mrs. Bimbo the Clown? And she burst into laughter, and she said, you are funny, you know, and it went through, it pierced my susceptibilities like a red-hot acid guy, that laughter. And I was very shy about asking anybody else for a number of years. And then we were joined in the circus by a lady who was half lady, half gentleman, called George Eyre. And lovely, lovely person, very reserved, you know. She sort of kept herself to himself. I didn't dare risk another rebuff. But then one night, I got back late, it was a Sunday, after the pictures, and I heard a rumpus in the big top. There were screams, and it was George Eyre screaming, "Help!" I rushed in, and all the others were there, and they said, "Help, you must help George Eyre. It is Bendy, the India rubber man." The India rubber man, he'd been on a bender, and he was drinking heavily, and he had got her in the corner and was saying, "Come away with me for the weekend, or I'll release the lion to ravage people." And I didn't know what to do. It was an awful moment. I turned to Madame Zaza, who is our Lady Human Cannonball, a lady of the highest calibre. I said to her very quietly, I didn't want to say, I said, Lady Zaza, you'll kindly do me the pleasure of inserting yourself in the breach and fusing yourself where necessary. She climbed in the cannon, and quite quietly, I said, all the rest of you, I said, hide behind something in case Madame Zaza ricochets. I then pointed the cannon towards the India rubber man, where he was struggling with my beloved George Eyre, and I said, India rubber man, release her and walk forward. Make one false move, and I will fill you with Madame Zaza. He paled, he blinched. He walked forward like a dog, crestfallen. Immediately we handed him to the police, and he's now doing a stretch at Wormwood Scrubs. Georgina fell into my arms. I suddenly had a new courage. I said, will you be wedded? Will you be Madame Bimbo? And she said, delighted. We are going to be married, ladies and gentlemen, on Saturday. No doubt some of you are thinking it might be rather strange marrying half lady, half gentleman. But I don't care how much anybody mocks, because as that very educated gentleman, Mr. Longland, said earlier, half a love is better than no bride.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, by your vote, Frank Muir just wins this desperate contest of the two stories, and he and Dilys Powell also win the entire contest, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, who also compiled the questions. The programme was devised by Tony Schreien and Edward J. Mason, and presented by the BBC.
You've been listening to My Word from the BBC, heard each week at this time. This is the WFMT Fine Arts Network.
The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. The first round tries to test their vocabulary, and for 2 marks, I want to know the meaning of these words. We begin with Dilys Powell. Dilys, what is or was an Aurochs?
Now, my sole acquaintance with an Aurochs occurred in Quo Vadis, when, finally, the heroine, after a lot of very disagreeable adventures, unless I'm quite mistaken, was carried in to the arena on the horns of an Aurochs. It is therefore a creature with horns, and I think it's a kind of stag.
Could be a dilemma.
Now, I think of something else that's got horns rather than a stag. Much simpler.
A bull, an ox.
Good. It's an extinct species of wild ox called Bos eurus, and some people call it the European bison, but that's quite wrong. And Ur simply means the earliest, the original ox, the first one that there ever was in Europe, I suppose.
It looked like a deer in Quo Vadis.
Well, they always get things wrong in Quo Vadis.
We were sitting in the cheap seats. It was all long, tall and thin.
On to Denis Norden. Denis, what does Bombazine mean?
This was a phrase used by German anti-aircraft bomber spotters during the war when they sighted a Wellington. Oberleutnant, ich hab Bombazine. It also crops up in sort of Victorian books as material that ladies wear. It's always black bombazine.
Yeah.
And I presume it's some kind of black material that Victorian ladies... Well, we once did a line about she fell down on her bombazine. We were young.
Well, I think you'll get your 2 marks before you go any further. It is, I'm told, a twilled dress material. It's either silk and worsted or cotton and worsted or worsted. It is a Latin word meaning silk, and it can just mean raw cotton or cotton wool. But it was, as Denis says, in its black colour, much used for mourning at Victorian funerals. All right, and Scott James now. What's the meaning of datura? D-A-T-U-R-A.
It's a sort of status symbol amongst gardeners. Because if you can grow a datura and keep it all the year round, it shows you've got a greenhouse. Because it's
Would it be a very
not hardy, tropical, very showy trumpet-flowered plant of, I think, a poisonous nature.
Yes, that's what I wanted. It wouldn't be a very safe one to leave for the children together,
Well, everybody does, but maybe they have mixed motives.
I think it's usually called the thorn apple or stramony, but it's a great, powerful narcotic and very dangerous. Frank Muir, what does mumchance mean?
Mum? It's when Dad's put on night shift.
I need a second shot.
Taking mumchance is keeping your top lip closely buttoned to the lower.
Yes. Yes, you're there. It was originally a game, a dicing game, and you couldn't play unless you kept absolutely silent. And then it became a silent masquerade. And as an adjective, and Frank's quite right, it means silent or tongue-tied. There's a nice quotation from Charles Lamb. Poor 29th of February that had sat all this while mumchance at the sideboard, having to wait for 4 years to come round. Well, before we begin the next round, I shall read out a quotation for each team to write down, and I hope the two women members of the teams will go on studying them, because at the end of the programme, I shall ask them where those quotations come from. And Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, your quotation is, appetite comes with eating, and Anne Scott James and Denis, yours is, the two oldest professions in the world ruined by amateurs. And then in the last round, I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their ideas of how these came to be said or written. Well, now we have a quickie round of initials or abbreviations, and 2 marks again. Dilys Powell, what does Prox stand for? P-R-O-X dot A-C-C dot.
Proxima or something accessit.
And means?
It means you're the next one.
After what?
After the first one.
Dilys is dead right. It's proximi accessit. It means the chap who wasn't first, but second in an examination or in winning a prize, placed in the next position on the list. Denis Norden, what's the meaning of B-T-H-U, dots between them? It's a capital B, capital T with a little H behind it, B-T-H, and then U capital, or it's sometimes called B-T-U. What's that mean?
BTU is seared onto the soul of anybody who's ever installed central heating. It's an entirely mythical way of counting by which central heating engineers persuade you've got to have a boiler so large that the kitchen is full up and you have to do the washing up in the dining room. They say it stands for British Thermal Units, but it's a way of bleeding you dry.
They come in thousands, like lire.
Yes. Well, absolutely right. I'm told it's the amount of heat required to raise 1 pound of water at maximum density through 1 degree Fahrenheit. I'll take that on trust. Anne Scott James, what does STG stand for? These are all small lowercase letters and no dots. STG stand for? It's one word.
One word,
Sitting.
standing.
I believe the in-economists now refer to this as metallic special drawing rights.
Sterling.
Yes, 2 marks it is. It's standard value, or 1 pound, without any odd money attached. It probably comes from an early Norman penny, which had a little star on it. Frank Muir.
Funny, because the pound's now worth about an early Norman penny.
Frank Muir, what is 12 mo? 12 written 1, 2, and then mo, small m, small o, dot.
Duodecimo.
And that means?
It means, well, if you take a sheet of paper, for a book. It's called a folio, and it's about the size of a sheet of paper. But it's a bit biggish, you see, so some bright spark had the idea of folding it. And if you fold a sheet of paper into 4, you get a quarto. If you fold it into 8, you get an octavo. If you fold it into 12, you get a 12mo.
Yes.
There's also a 16mo. 12mo is a book size, and it's about the size of a paperback.
Well done, Frank. Absolutely dead right. Next round's about the odd man out. I give 4 book titles. 3 of them are written by the same author, and 1 is not. I want to know which is the odd one and who the authors are. 2 marks again. Dilys Powell, Jane Eyre, Shirley, Wuthering Heights, and Villette.
Jane Eyre is by which one? Charlotte.
Yes.
Wuthering Heights is by Charlotte. No, Emily, sorry, Emily.
All right, what about the rest? You're floundering a little.
Which do you think they are?
I don't know. Not my neck of the wall.
Emily. Goodbye, Emily.
No, I'm going to give you no marks at all.
Ah.
Jane Eyre, Shirley, Villette were all by Charlotte Bronte, afterwards Mrs. Nichols, but Wuthering Heights was the only novel written by Emily Bronte, who also published a fair number of good poems. Sorry. Denis Norden, Sinister Street, The City of Dreadful Night, Our Street, and Carnival.
Well,
Easy.
Sinister Street and Carnival, I know, are Compton Mackenzie.
Yes.
City of Dreadful Night is James Thompson.
Well done. Yeah.
Now, by it's purely mathematics, I figure that Our Street is also by Compton Mackenzie.
Well done. Anne's got James. The Hound of Heaven, The Garden of Proserpine, or Proserpine, whichever you prefer, A Forsaken Garden, When the Hounds of Spring Are on Winter's Traces.
We've got a Francis
Yes.
Thompson, haven't
Francis
we?
Thompson.
That's right.
Right.
That's
Which
the
one?
Hound of Heaven.
Hound
Good.
of Heaven.
And the other 3? Oh, sorry, I've rather helped, haven't I?
Oh, no.
When the Hounds of Spring.
On Winter's Traces.
But that's Shelley, it can't be.
No.
Huh?
No.
Starts
to the right.
far behind.
Starts to the right letter, but it's a bit later.
When the Hounds of Spring... Swinburne.
Swinburne.
Yeah.
The other 3 are by Swinburne. The Hound of Heaven's by Francis Thompson.
Yeah.
Let us just
I really
sort of-
don't know how to mark that one.
Well, I don't think we got much help. Do you?
The Hound of Heaven is the only one out, the odd man out. Francis Thompson, it's the long poem describing the poet's flight from God and the pursuit and the overtaking. The other 3 are all by Algernon, Charles, Swinburne. Frank Muir, Typee, Billy Budd, Peter Simple, Moby Dick.
Moby Dick, Herman Melville, Typee, Herman Melville, Billy Budd, Crabbe. No, what?
No.
Benjamin Britten.
That is Melville.
Melville?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yes. And the other one, you've given us 3, Peter Simple.
Is it Marriott?
Yes, quite right. 2 marks.
Captain.
3 novels by Herman Melville, Moby Dick, Billy Budd, and Typee. And, of course, Billy Budd was turned into an opera later by Benjamin Britten. Peter Simple is perhaps the best-known seafaring novel by Captain Frederick Marriott.
Except for me.
This is a round about nouns of multitude, like a pride of lions or a charm of goldfinches. So please, for 2 marks, can you give me the correct term for a number or multitude of the following objects? And Dilys Powell, starlings.
Flock.
No, it's not the technical term. I give a half a mark for this.
Works. It works.
Murmuration.
Yes, that's what I wanted. 2 marks, right. Starlings, you see enormous numbers of them in the sky, is a murmuration of starlings, though it's rather a gentle word for the extreme din that they in fact make. Now, Denis Norden, jurymen.
Jurymen.
All women.
All women. Because they say that a jury is 11 men and 1 woman who go into a locked room and then come out and say not guilty. Well, juries are always empanelled.
Yes.
So it would be a panel of jurors.
Absolutely right. They're sworn onto a panel of jurymen. And Scott James, bread.
A batch of bread.
Yes. A batch of bread, which is a whole baking. Or it can be called a cast of bread, C-A-S-T-E. Frank Muir, sheriff's officers.
Posse.
Yes. Well done. 2 marks.
I suppose the singular is possum.
Yes, it is. That's all right. It means to be able, therefore, a power of officers to help the sheriff do what he has to do. 2 marks. Well done. Well, now we come to the quotations and stories of the last round and go back here to the quotations I gave the teams earlier in the programme. For 2 marks, Dilys Powell, can you give me the origin of your quotation? Appetite comes with eating.
Somebody French.
Mm-hmm.
Voltaire. Rabelais.
Yes, that'll do. Now, and Scott James, the origin of your quotation. The 2 oldest professions in the world are ruined by amateurs.
Now, that sort of shocking witticism is always either Wildshaw or an American.
Yes, all right. Plump for transatlantic origin.
Plump, one of the New Yorker gentlemen, then.
Yes?
I'll plump for Alexander Walcott.
Plumping, absolutely right. 2 marks, well done. Well, now I'm going to ask Frank and Denis to give me their explanations of how these quotations came into being. And for this round only, the marks will go to whichever improbable story receives the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back to Frank Muir and his Appetite Comes with Eating.
I'm not able to give you a story, I'm afraid, because I've got to utilise the 6 minutes available to me for an auction. I've got something to auction here, and I want your bids, because I've got to make £12. I must make £12 this evening to replace the electric blanket, my wife's electric blanket, which I cut with a razor blade. You see, the reason I did this was it was much earlier in the year, and I was lying there in the sun, and I was watching my dog, my Afghan hound, and I was lying there really brooding how much better at living she was than me. So I thought, if only I could make my metabolism more close to that of a dog, perhaps I could assume my dog's properties. I mean, a scientific breakthrough. So I had a word with the vet. I said, look, vet, I wonder if you could tell me something. How does, fundamentally, to a man of science, which you are, how does the metabolism, the structure of a dog, vary from that of a human being, say me? So he said, well, dogs only have one name. Like Spot, Prince, Lassie. Whereas a great run of human beings have 2. They're called John Thomas or Eleanor Winifred or Mabel Lucy. I said, He said a dog's temperature is higher than that of a human being. It's about 2 degrees higher. I said, He said a dog is about 100 degrees. I said, Europa! I said, that's it! Europa! Which means the same as the Greek, only a sort of common market way of saying it. I said, now, if I can raise my body temperature for the whole 24 hours up to 100 degrees, and I was watching television, I was watching the astronauts, and the commentator said that their bodies are kept at a constant temperature by electrically controlled underwear. Europa! I said, Europa, that's it. So, first thing, pair of long comms. And I sneaked my wife's electric blanket and a razor blade, and I cut it in a long strip round the wire. So the wire was still covered, the electric wire was still covered by a blanket. I then wrapped that round my comms, actually I glued it, I'll be quite honest, I didn't sew it, but I glued it with that rubber solution stuff to the comms, went to bed, plugged in, on low, lay back, off to sleep. There were some errors in this, actually, I realised after. I'd chosen the hottest night of the year to do it. And also, when you sweat, by 2 a.m, I was in agony. The comms had shrunk right down. It was so tight under the armpits. And not only that, it was so tight under the circumstances, I decided that the experiment wasn't worth proceeding with. And as a matter of fact, I realised what a dreadful, almost lethal mistake I almost made, because had I given myself my dog's metabolism, dogs only live to the age of about 12, I would not be here tonight. But the apparatus is for sale, ladies and gentlemen. It is for sale. It would suit a rather small, cold husband. So I've got to get £12 to replace the electric blanket for my wife before the cold weather comes in. So what am I bid? Ladies and gentlemen, please put your bid in. What am I bid? Lot 1, a pair of tight comms with heating.
Nice to know that Frank gets so much intelligence from his Afghan hound. And we go on now to Denis Norden, and if you remember, his quotation was, "The 2 oldest professions in the world ruined by amateurs."
I don't quite know how to put this to you, the young doctor said to me. I don't know quite how to put this, but I've got my stethoscope stuck in your navel. Well, I can tell you, my heart sank. This, of course, distended my abdomen, and the stethoscope popped out. But the sinking feeling remained. I'd made a mistake. I'd made a dreadful mistake, for which I could only blame the British Medical Association. Did anybody read that announcement that they put out? They recommended all doctors to abandon that rather conservative black jacket and striped trousers attitude that they have and start wearing some really sort of mod-type gear so as to give the profession a bolder and more forward-looking image. Well, I saw this thing in the paper just at a time when I was getting rather cheesed off with our family doctor, or cold finger, as we call it. I'd had him, so when I saw this new young fellow had started up locally, I thought, we'll give him a go. But what took me aback was this stethoscope, because it had 2 end bits. Not 1, but 2. And when I indicated it, he just grinned and said, "Man, I really dig stereo." And then he got sort of brisk, and he says, "All right, then, right." He said, "Now, what part of your body are you getting these headaches?" "No, doctor." I said, "No, it's not a headache. It's a hammer toe." Whereupon he stood me against the wall, and this great machine whirred into action and took 48 instant 3D X-ray photos of every part of my body from skull to foot, not one of which did he cast more than a cursory glance at. Pausing only to say, "Anybody ever told you you've got a kidney shaped like a dressing table?" He dropped them all into this computer. "Look, doctor," I said, isn't this rather an impersonal way of conducting medicine?" He said, "To me, sir," he said, "being a doctor means more than just having a place to park." He said, "To me, a patient is more than just a bundle of symptoms, a collection of ailments. To me, each patient is an individual human being. And I'd like you to remember that, Mr. Bailey." "Norden," I said. "My name is Norden." He said, the computer will sort it out. And sure enough, at that moment, there was a sort of whir and a click from this great grey machine, and out came this typed card that they call a readout. And its ink was still wet. Ah, well, he said, now we'll see. There's no hit or miss about this, he said. The possibility of human fallibility and error has been completely eliminated. He picked up the card and gazed at it, rather somberly, I thought. What does it say, I said. It says, there's a lot of it about. That is why I now take my ailments to a herbalist in the East India Dock Road. As Alexander Woolcott once came very near to saying, the new, boldest profession in our world ruined my hammer toes.
By your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Frank Muir wins the story, but nevertheless the entire contest ends in a draw, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, who also compiled the questions. The programme was devised by Tony Schreien and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel, is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. The first round tries to test their vocabulary, and for 2 marks, I want to know the meaning of these words. We begin with Dilys Powell. Dilys, what's the meaning of suable? S-U-A-B-L-E, suable.
Suable?
Yes.
Liable to be sued.
Exactly that. 2 marks. Suable means something that can be sued, liable to be sued, legally subject to civil process of law. Well done. 2 marks. Denis Norden, what is trote? T-R-O-A-T, or even if you prefer it, trote.
Well, one would be enough, I think. I don't know. Trote. I think it's a trout whose mother had an affair with a stoat. I tell you, between a trout and a stoat, that takes a lot of perseverance.
You're in the animal kingdom, which is right.
Genetically impossible.
It's an animal or fish.
I think 1 out of 2 for gallantry. Trote is the cry of the rutting buck. And
The answer to that is, oh dear.
it also, I'm told, I didn't know this until this evening, it can be an interjection used for urging on hounds, asses, and sheep. But that's quite a bit different. Anne Scott James, what does Kenozoic or Cainozoic mean? C-E-N-O-Z-O-I-C or C-A-I-N, the same. Kenozoic.
It sounds like one of those words like Pleistocene.
Yes?
Which is something to do with traitor or...
Making models.
Geology, that's the thing.
Have a shot at when this happened, roughly. I mean, give or take 200 or 100 million years.
Absolutely recently, I should think.
That's
Just
right.
about 1 million years ago.
It includes that. I think that'll do. Cainozoic is the third or latest of the great geological periods. It's the one also called tertiary. It simply means third. And it comes from 2 words, Greek kainos, and meaning new, and zoon, meaning animal. It's the bit that includes us, which is why 1 million years is quite a good shot.
Especially if you're on HP, yeah.
Frank Muir, what does the verb to interosculate mean? Inter and then O-S-C-U-L-A-T-E. Interosculate.
Well, that's tautology, isn't it? You can't osculate by yourself.
Yes, but
Osculate is to kiss. Inter is between, isn't
That's
it?
right.
Interosculate means to kiss between. Yes, but between what and what? This is an oral examination, isn't it?
It's an orgy.
1.5. It means to intermingle with each other or form a connecting link between two
Doubtless.
between 2 groups of objects. It can be used for all sorts of other kinds of things, like plants and vegetables, quite apart from what you do with lips. Now, before we begin round 2, I give each team a quotation for them to write down, and then I hope that the 2 women members of the team will go on studying the quotations, because at the end of the programme, I shall ask them where they come from. Not they, but the quotations. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, your quotation is, to err is human, to forgive divine. And Anne Scott James and Denis, yours is, farewell, a long farewell to all my greatness. And then at the end of the programme, I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their ideas of how these came to be said or written. The second round asks the team to identify the author of the week and to answer questions about his works. 2 marks for correct answers. So I begin with a quotation. The cataract of the cliff of heaven fell blinding off the
G.K.
bridge.
Chesterton.
It's not your question. And I think I must be allowed to finish the quotation, though you're dead right. As if it would wash the stars away as suds go down a sink, the 7 heavens came roaring down for the throats of hell to drink, and Noah, he cocked his eye and said, it looks like rain, I think. The water has drowned the Matterhorn as deep as a Mendip mine, but I don't care where the water goes if it doesn't get into the wine. They know too much, that's the trouble. Anyway, the first question has been answered as to who the author was, but that's not the end of it. In which of his novels does this song occur? G.K. Chesterton's novels.
Frank?
Flying In.
Yes, quite right.
Which is a collection of drinking ballads.
Absolutely right. G.K. Chesterton's Flying In. It was sung by Captain Patrick Dalroy, who was ex-King of Ithaca. Now, Denis Norden, what was the name of the inn and what happened to it?
Oh, dear. Can't remember anything about it except a big cheese.
That's right, that's right. Captain Patrick Dalroy was an ex-officer of Her Majesty's Navy, which might help you to the name of the inn.
The name of the inn? I can't remember.
I'm getting mixed up with the Jumblies.
I think 1 out of 2. The name of the inn was the Old Ship, and it was closed by the machinations of Lord Ivywood. So Patrick Dalroy and Humphrey Pump, who was the landlord, escaped with this large round cheese, as Dennis quite rightly says, but also with the inn sign and a barrel of rum, and they then defied the law by setting up the sign and providing drinks all round the country. And Scott James, which day of the week was given as a pseudonym for the man in the title of another of G.K. Chesterton's novels?
Oh, the man who was Friday. Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday, Thursday. The man who was Thursday.
You win on
it was on the repeat.
I was thinking of Robinson Crusoe.
You win on the post. Thursday. The main character in The Man Who Was Thursday, who was called Gabriel Syme, found himself included in a conspiracy in which he becomes the man who was Thursday under the fairly sinister-looking, but in the end benevolent rule of the man who was Sunday. Now, Frank Muir, what was Father Brown not really so very innocent about?
Is this a value judgment you're calling for? The Innocence of Father Brown was the first of the Father Brown novels.
That's right.
Father Brown was a Roman Catholic priest who was also a detective.
Yeah.
Innocent, one would have thought of crime, but cognizant of the workings of the mentality of men's minds.
Absolutely right. 2 marks it is. Now we've got a round of specialised nouns which denote certain types of movement, and again 2 marks. Dilys Powell, what is an entrechat, and where does it usually happen? Entrechat.
It happens in the ballet.
And what is it?
Well, it's a kind of, I don't think I can illustrate it at my age.
Oh, go on.
You sort of leap on
I'll
one...
hold your boot.
You leap on one foot, and you...
Is it when you scissor?
No, you
Yes,
don't.
that's right, that's it.
Oh, beg your pardon.
You go...
You scissor.
You leap up and you go... You make like an egg beater.
I think that's a very accurate description of it. It's a movement in ballet dancing, and it means you strike your heels together for as many times as you possibly can in the course of leaping up into the air, and comes from an Italian word, capriola intrecciato, which is simply a complicated caper, and it certainly is. 2 marks. Denis Norden, what is a telemark, and in which country was it first developed?
A telemark is the imprint left on the carpet when you move the furniture. I know it's something to do with skiing.
Yes, fair enough.
But what to do with skiing?
Well,
they didn't ask you that.
No, I never done it.
Have a shot at the country it comes from.
Norway?
Yes, I'll do.
Norway.
Telemark was a steered or swung turn in skiing, and you used it either to change direction if you could, or to stop short equally if you could, and particularly in powder snow. And it's a district in Norway, Telemark, where it was invented. And Scott James, what is a caracole, and who does it? C-A-R-A-C-O-L-E, a caracole, and who does it?
I should think it's a dance.
In a way it is. How many legs?
How many legs?
Yes, it's helped.
It's that equestrian.
That's right, that's what I wanted.
Oh, sort of thing they do in the Spanish riding school.
Yes,
It's a prancing job.
yes. Which way?
It's
prancing.
striptease or undressage.
We all think it's a horse prancing on its hind legs.
Well, you're not awfully far wrong. It's executing a half turn to the right or to the left. It's done by the horse and with luck by the rider at the same time. 1.5. Frank Muir, what is an abseil? A-B-S-E-I-L. And in what kind of terrain might you be likely to see it happening?
Could be the terrain now standing at the platform. Abseil.
Abseil.
Is it,
German.
Now, wait a minute. If I haven't heard the
Did you
word...
say-
German.
German.
Up.
Away. Something
I,
away. Something...
climbing.
Yes.
Well, Jack's a climber.
Damn rope.
It's one when you put your foot on a piton, or whatever it is, and
It's got a rope.
Which way are you going, up or down?
downwards.
Oh, that's right.
Downwards, the lady in front is gesticulating. Most helpful. Thank you very much.
1.5 with aid. Abseil is the act of descending a mountain or a rock face on a doubled rope, which is secured, you hope, above you, because it's too difficult or you haven't got time to climb down it unaided. It's simply two German words to rope down or rope off. We turn now to very familiar lines of poetry, but I shall try and make the question just a bit more difficult by asking team members to give me the line before the lines I'm going to quote. And I also want the name of the author and the name of the poem, so 3 marks this time in all. Dilys Powell, and the day returns too soon, yet we'll go no more a-roving by the light of the moon.
It's Byron.
Yes?
And it begins,
Yeah?
so we'll go no more a-roving, doesn't it?
Yes, that's perfectly right.
It does.
Yes.
Time is past for loving.
Jolly good shot.
Really?
1.5. Though the night was made for loving, and the day returns too soon, yet we'll go no more a-roving by the light of the moon. And it is Byron, and the poem is simply called So We'll Go No More a-Roving. Very poignant little poem. 1.5. Denis Norden, and all the world would stare if wife should dine at Edmonton, and I should dine at where?
Oh, that's John Guelphs.
Yes.
And I can't remember the line, but it's something to do with his wedding.
Yes, that's right. Yes, fix up a line about wedding, and you'll be more or less right.
Tomorrow is my wedding.
Yes, that's fine. That'll near enough. And who wrote it?
Cowper, William.
Yes? 2 marks. Anne Scott James, that every man in arms would wish to be.
Is it the Agincourt speech?
No, much later.
Man in arms. Should wish to be.
Think of the middle of Trafalgar Square.
Oh, well, I can think of Nelson.
Yes. This is The Character of the Happy Warrior by William Wordsworth, based on the career of Nelson, but he rather abandoned this likeness after he found out about Lady Hamilton. And it starts, who is the happy warrior? Who is he that every man in arms would wish to be? Then it goes on at great length about how good Nelson was. Frank Muir, I know the scientific names of beings animalculous.
It's a song.
Yes?
That's
right.
I am the very model of a modern Major General.
That's the song.
By William Schwenk Gilbert.
Yes,
in collaboration with Sir Arthur Sullivan.
Yeah. Which particular opera?
It's The Pirates of Penzance.
Jolly good so far. Can you do me the line before the one I quoted?
Something about I know about integral and differential calculus.
Well done. Well done. Well, now we come to the last round, and we go back to those quotations I gave the teams earlier in the programme. For 2 marks, Dilys Powell, can you give me the origin of your quotation? To err is human, to forgive divine.
Must be Pope.
It is Pope. Essay on criticism, 2 marks. And Anne Scott James, the origin of yours, please, which was farewell, a long farewell to all my greatness.
It's Shakespeare, Jack.
But which play?
Henry VIII.
Yes, that's right. 2 marks it is. And now I'm going to ask Frank and Denis to give me their explanations of how these quotations came into being. And for this round, the marks will go to whichever improbable explanation receives the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So, back to Frank Muir and his quotation, "To err is human."
Thank you.
To forgive divine.
I was standing in the street, queuing up for a bus, and there were two ladies, Lady A and Lady B. And Lady B said, "To err is human," and my spirit was uplifted. It suddenly reinforced my faith in human nature, in the benevolence and the essential niceness of human beings, after what Lady A had said. It was really to do with this business of how one pictures oneself, the image one has of oneself as against the actual thing. You never really know what people think of you. You only know what you think of yourself. I can see myself quite clearly without any kind of false vision. I have a flexible chin. This is almost indistinguishable from a weak chin, but it does have a very distinct, it's a sort of liberal chin, you know, and I have laughing dimples in my cheeks and chin, rather charming dimples. They're inverted dimples, actually. Whereas most dimples go in, mine come out. Can often be confused with warts and spots, but and I have a retroussé nose, and above that I have little lines, little laugh lines, which have matured into deep guffaws, and around the eyes I have what one can't call crow's feet, because that's a sort of derogatory kind of term, you know, crow's feet is these sort of very charming vulture's claws. But really a splendid picture. This is a picture I've always had of myself, and the picture this woman A and B were looking at in the paper, and it really goes back to when I was young, because when I was young I had a vision of myself, and I knew what I wanted to be, and that was a male model. I had three ambitions, actually. One was to touch my nose with the end of my tongue, which I couldn't do because it's retroussé, as I've explained, with a barber's action. And the second was to cycle along Broadstairs Pier for 8 circumferences of the pedals without opening my eyes, which I achieved one winter afternoon, or would have done, except that at the 7th circumference I ran out of pier. My third was to be a male model. The attraction of being a male model was because you didn't have to do anything. You just had to stand slightly out of focus in the background, and not move, which suited me because I get tired very easily. Now, the first time I had an opportunity of doing this was when a whiskey company asked me to lend my face to a newspaper advertisement. Now, this I thought I can do. The photograph was taken, and I saw 2 women with a newspaper, with my photograph, advertising this whiskey there, and I thought, now they're going to comment on the inverted dimples and the chin, those intriguing little guffaws around the eyes. But you know what Lady A said? Lady A said, look at him. He looks like a constipated orangutan. My world shattered. My world crumbled about my ears like cheap hair cream. But Lady B restored my faith. Lady B said, dear, to you he may be a constipated orangutan, but somewhere somebody loves him. Probably his wife, poor soul. And to err is human.
Other thing, that was a splendid commercial for Frank's particular rugged style of beauty. And we go on to Denis Norden, and if you remember, his quotation was, farewell, a long farewell to all my greatness.
Have you ever fallen through a harp? Oh, it's a messy experience. Happened to me the other night. I was being led backstage at the Royal Festival Hall after a concert, and they suddenly switched the lights out. And my friend shouted out, "Wait there." But I'd spotted this faint white aperture ahead. So I said, "It's all right. I can see a doorway." So I gaily leapt through it. Twang, twang, twang. It was awful. And as I gazed at this mess of splintered wood and sprawling strings, I thought to myself, it's happened again. Why are my personal disasters always such grotty ones? Last summer, I poured a whole cupful of hot coffee onto my lap in a nudist camp. Or take the first time, well, in fact the only time that I ever wore tails. The firm that I hired them from enclosed a keychain with them, one of the trouser type keychains. You do up a little leather fob at one end onto your braces button and let the other end sort of dangle elegantly into your trouser pocket. Well, I got home at 4 o'clock in the morning, pulled the other end of the chain out of my pocket, and inserted my key in the front door. Now, I really didn't have any reason to believe that anybody else would be up at that hour. But she was. And hearing my key going into the lock, she snatched the door wide open. As often as not, it's this failing I have of just going off into a dream. You know, even at the most inopportune moments. The worst one did last night. This cocktail party, a private house, room jammed with people. There I'm standing, holding a warm gin and tonic, miles away, absolutely miles away. Sip the gin and tonic, think, hello, there's something lacking. And mindlessly, I reach out for a lemon, squeeze it into my glass, then suddenly wake up with absolute horror. The lemon had feathers on it. I can't tell you the indignity of having to go up to one's hostess and say, "Excuse me, I've just squeezed your canary." Particularly as it was during one of those inexplicable moments that comes over parties when for no reason everybody stops talking at the same moment. People say that that is a sign that the angel of death is passing over at that moment. All I can say is I sincerely hoped it was. In fact, I called out, "Down here, mate." That's exactly what I need at this moment. A farewell, a long farewell to all my grottiness.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, by your vote, Denis Norden wins the contest of the stories, and the entire contest ends in a draw.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, who also compiled the questions. The programme was devised by Tony Schreien and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC.
You've been listening to My Word from the BBC.
The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. And here's round one. For 2 marks, I want to know the meaning of the following words. Beginning with Anne Scott James. Anne, what is a batata? B-A-T-A-T-A. Batata.
Oh, I cooked one tonight. It's a very interesting new vegetable, bred in the Antarctic, which is a cross between a Batavia and a potato.
I'm getting on the right line.
You either stew it or frizzle it or
stuff
muck it up. It's a sweet potato, in fact, I think.
Absolutely right. 2 marks it is. The batata is a West Indian plant. It's a sweet, or sometimes called Spanish potato. Frank Muir, what's the meaning of ululate? U-L-U-L-A-T-E, ululate.
My Afghan hound's ululating
Yes.
at the moment because it's got a phantom pregnancy. It wanders around all day going,
Yes.
That's ululating.
2 marks. It's howling or hooting or lamenting loudly. It applies to dogs, jackals, and sometimes widows. Dilys Powell, what's a sierra? S-I-E-R-R-A. Sierra.
It's a rather high mountain, which is
Surname
associated in my mind with films about, generally about South America, the sort of west coast.
Yes, what's the mountain look like if you look at the edge of it?
Very high.
Not high only.
High and jagged.
Yes, that's what I wanted. 2 marks it is. Sierra is a long, jagged mountain chain. It's also a Spanish mackerel, I suppose because of its backbone or something of that sort. And it comes from a Latin word, serra, meaning a saw, or saw edge. It can also be the red gaseous envelope which is round the sun outside the photosphere, because that is jagged too.
Well, that's very interesting.
2 marks. Denis Norden, what's the meaning of erst? E-R-S-T, and it's not erst. It's
I'm
erst.
glad it's not erst. We don't want to make it difficult. Would it be something like as in erstwhile?
Yes, quite.
Well, erst then means something which was done formally.
Yes. 2 marks. Erst means the before est that you can think of. It's in the superlative. And Milton wrote, the horrid spectacle which erst my eyes beheld and still behold. Now, before we begin round 2, I give each team a quotation for them to write down. And I want the 2 women members of the teams to go on studying those quotations, because at the end of the programme, I shall ask them where the quotations come from. Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, your quotation is, a crown is no cure for the headache. And Dilys Powell and Frank, yours is, honni soit qui mal y pense. And then at the end of the programme, I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their ideas of how these came to be said or written. Round 2 is a round of words of similar types, but with different meanings. 2 marks. Can you give me the different meanings of these? Anne Scott James, avant-courrier and avant-garde.
Well, avant-garde means ahead of your time, before the guard. It means absolutely more than up to date. Swinging.
Yes, I think it's probably near enough. Avant-courrier.
I should think it's a torchbearer, somebody who goes before the runner.
Yes.
Would that do sort of thing?
Yes, will do. 2 marks. Avant-courrier is one who runs or rides in front of the rest, the advance guards or scouts of an army, for instance. Avant-garde means pioneers, innovators, usually in any particular art of a particular period, for instance, the Impressionists or the Fauvists or people like that. 2 marks. Frank Muir, bullus and bullate. B-U-L-L-A-C-E and B-U-L-L-A-T-E. Bullus and bullate.
Yes, well, Bullace is a bull who's particularly good at what bulls are bred for. He's not just the king of the bulls, he's a bullace. On the other hand...
It's true. True.
Oh, it's a wild plum.
Dead right.
Thank you. Well, I was near. Thank you for just giving that little urge.
What are the hell bullets?
Bullate is a condition, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
You know, when you blow,
Yes.
blow things out
Yes, this
of
is
a
it.
pipe.
Yes.
You know, what do they call sort of...
Bubbles?
Yes, bubbles, yes.
Yes, that's right.
Bubbly.
Bubbly.
We should
Bubbly.
stop interfering with my partner is under the impression that it's a bubble.
Well, bubbly, she said.
Bubbly.
Yes. Well, between you, we've got you 2 marks.
Bubbly.
Bullace is the wild or can be semi-cultivated plum tree or fruit. Bullate means puffy or blistered looking, comes from a Latin word meaning bubbled. So you're quite right. 2 marks.
It's your Latin again, isn't it?
Now, Dilys Powell. Charlock and Charlotte.
Well, Charlock is wild mustard.
Yes?
You've been eating fish again.
And what's that one? Charlotte?
Charlotte.
As an apple.
Well, it's the
Yes,
name-
that's right. Not the girl's name, no.
Not the girl's name.
No.
Well, it's a form of cooking in which you have a lot of sort of apple sauce, a lot of cream on top,
Biscuits, muck.
enclosed in
Yeah.
a kind of pastry.
Yes, that'll do. 2 marks it is. Charlock is field mustard, a common yellow-flowered weed, but it can be grown commercially. And Charlotte is a kind of pudding, usually made of stewed fruit, with casing or layers or covering of bread or biscuits or sponge cake or breadcrumbs. Charlotte Russe being a custard enclosed in sponge cake, and apple Charlotte being apple disguised with ancient crusts. And now, Denis Norden, the difference between a hubbub and a hubble bubble.
Hubbub is a noise or commotion, as of a crowd.
Yes?
And a hubble bubble is a rather exotic way of smoking through water, and it makes the noises rather like, I don't know if you've ever taken a child out to a posh restaurant and they've asked for something that's got a straw in it, and when it gets to the end you have to clobber them. They got bubble, hubble, bubble, hubble, bubble with the straw.
Well done, Dennis. That's absolutely right. Hubbub is a confused din or disturbance, or can be a riot, and it comes from an old Irish word, which is a war cry. Hubble bubble is a form of hookah or water pipe. Also the bubbling noise, as Dennis says, that it makes, the nargil in Turkish. And it can also mean confused talk. In this round, I shall give you a line from a poem, and I want you to give me for 3 marks this time. First of all, the line that immediately precedes it, and second, the title of the poem, and third, the name of the poet. And Scott James, weep and you weep alone. Line before.
No, laugh and the world laughs with you.
Yes.
Weep and you weep alone. Now, come on.
Well, that's
Denis Norden.
the very well-known multitude of Ella Wheeler Wilcox.
That's right.
Oh.
Yeah. We've
Well
got
done.
2 out of 3.
What are we missing?
Oh, no, the title of the poem, a single word.
Solitude.
That's right. Ella Wheeler Wilcox's poem, Solitude, and it runs, laugh and the world laughs with you, weep and you weep alone, for the sad old earth must borrow its mirth, but has trouble enough of its own. It goes on rather like that for a very long time. So, Frank Muir, which they ate with a runcible spoon.
It's the Jumblies, isn't it?
It's the same chap, but
It's
not
Lear.
that poem.
It's Lear.
Yes.
It's the Owl and the
Jumblies.
Pussycat.
Yes, the Owl and the Pussycat. They dined
Went
on...
to see in a sieve. Ham
right.
and slice of jam.
no, it's a... I don't know how...
Surely in the
That's
world
just
of Lear.
stupid.
No, I've given you it away now. If you sort of chewed up the ham in a sort of chewer, what would you get?
Hamburger.
Yes, yes.
Mince.
They dined on...
Mince.
Mince pies.
And strawberry quince. They done on quince.
And strawberry mint. And
All right,
Not strawberry.
not
2.5 again. It's the nonsense songs of Edward Lear. It's the Owl and the Pussycat. They dined on mince and slices of quince, which they ate with a runcible spoon. And a runcible spoon is one of these funny spoons in which there's a bit that goes spiky on the one side and a spoony bit on the other side.
It's bifurcated.
Bifurcated, that's right. 2.5.
Look it up.
Now, Dilys Powell is new and neat and adequately tall.
I've never heard of it.
I'll help a little.
Please.
I think it has 4 quatrains, if I remember rightly, and each of them ends, I think I will not hang myself today.
It's no help to me.
A member of the Savile Club and rather fat. A long time ago.
Chesterton.
Yes.
Chesterton. Chesterton. I think that's about as far as I'm concerned. I don't know about you.
Well, I don't want to cheat by helping you.
No.
It would be unfair on the others, I feel.
Yes.
Half a mark. It's a Ballad of Suicide by G.K. Chesterton, and it goes, the gallows in my garden, people say, is new and neat and adequately tall. I knot the rope on in a knowing way, as one who knots his necktie for a ball, but in the end he doesn't hang himself. Half out of 3. Denis Norden, whence all but he had fled.
It's getting down to my literary level now. The boy stood on the burning deck.
Yes.
Whence all but he had fled.
And
it's by the lady, isn't it by the lady who wrote Home Sweet Home?
Yes, I think it is.
Mrs. Heman.
That's right, yep. And the title of this particular poem...
This one is, it's like the Humphrey Boat... Casabianca.
You get your 3 marks, well done. And now we come to the last round, and go back to those quotations I gave the 2 teams earlier in the programme. 2 marks, and Scott James. Can you give me the origin of your quotation? A crown is no cure for the headache.
I think it's sort of proverbial.
It does come in one author's collection. It may have been before his time, I agree.
18th century author?
Yes, 18th century. And transatlantic, just to help.
I didn't know. Transatlantic. Franklin.
Yes. Good shot. 1.5, I think. Benjamin Franklin in Poor Richard, I think. The royal crown cures not the headache. There's a sort of back reference to that in one of the King Henry IV, either part 1 or part 2, I can't remember which in Shakespeare, but Benjamin Franklin anyway in 1757. Now, Dilys Powell, the origin of yours, On y soir qui mal y pense.
Well, it's the inscription which relates to the Order of the Garter.
Yes, and the legend about it?
The legend is that a lady wore it, and some royal character, I think, implied that to look at it...
Fell off at an old-time dance or something. Yes, that's right. And somebody picked it up and said, hey, aye.
Shame
the king in question said,
shame be to him who thinks evil.
Whom evil thinks thereunto.
Yes, all right, that's 2 marks it is. Well, now I'm going to ask Denis and Frank to give me their explanation of how these quotations came into being. And for this round, the marks will go to whichever explanation gets the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So, back, first of all, to Denis Norden. A crown is no cure for the headache.
My grandmother used to have a saying, the unexpected doesn't always happen, but when it does happen, it's always when you don't expect it. Now, to illustrate the truth of this, I'll have to take you back several decades to the time when I was 17, 6'3", and so painfully skinny that in repose I looked like a discarded pair of braces. And this configuration made me so terribly shy in feminine company that at this time of which I speak, when I was 17, I had still never kissed any female who wasn't either a blood relation or 4-legged. Then one day, one fateful day, my mother came up to my bedroom and she said, Mrs. Forbush is coming to tea and she's bringing her eldest for you to play with while we talk. Well, I just grunted ungraciously, and as soon as she'd gone, went back to cutting out corset advertisements from the back numbers of the Draper's Record, which at that period, being what I was, and in the condition I was very much addicted to. Well, an hour later, the door opened, and there stood, well, even looking back on it, after all these years, my marrow bones melt to think of it. Her name was Lila, the love machine. 17 and a half, raven-eyed, black-haired, and sort of wet-lipped ripeness. I only wish my wallet were as filled out now as she was then. Well, my mother said, play nicely. And off she went. I just stared at Lila. Never in my whole life had I ever seen anything so utterly tangible. I sort of swallowed and I said, would you like to look at my Meccano catalogue? She shook her head, and the movement sort of rippled all the way down. It was like, I don't know if you ever had a blancmange in a railway dining car. It utterly silenced me. She looked at me up and down, then she said, in a very high, clear voice, I tell you what, let's kiss. Now, Lila had a style of kissing that could only be described as though eating an overripe pear. I stumble at the very words even now. It utterly devastated me then. My twill-fit vest ran up my back like a window blind. Now, I don't want you to get the wrong idea about this. It was just the one kiss. After that, we were called down to tea. She left soon after. I never saw her again. But throughout the years in between, she was the ideal against which I measured every other woman I ever met, and they all failed. And as one grew more and more middle-aged, one thought, if only I could meet her again, as I am now, and as she was then. Now, impossible, you may say. Listen. This month, 2 weeks ago, I was in King's Road. I'd gone down there because a friend of mine had taken over a disused telephone box and turned it into a boutique. And there, across the crowded room, in front of me, suddenly I see a figure. Unmistakable. I ran across, my dear, pardon me for accosting you, but you must be, you surely must be Lila Forbush's daughter. The response was cold, terse. Up your kilt. I was bewildered, flabbergasted. I stammered. I said, I meant no offense. You certainly gave it. Why? I'm Lila Forbush's son. Now, you do see what I mean when I say that the unexpected always comes when you don't expect it. Perhaps I should have listened to my grandmother, but there are some cases where, as Benjamin Franklin used to walk all over America saying, a gran is no cure for the heartache.
most heart-rending story. And we go on to Frank Muir, and if you remember, his line was, "On y soit qui mal y pense."
On y soit qui mal y pense, French. Now, I had a terrible row with my wife yesterday about this, because she said I said it to her. Only yesterday, and I did not. I do not speak French. It's partly a matter of principle, and partly because I never learnt it at school. I missed French because I was having a tooth out at the time, and I missed Spanish because I was having an ingrowing toenail removed. And at the end of school, I was not only light in languages, I was about 1.5 stone lighter in weight. But having no languages, I decided that the way, really, to get through is to talk English to foreigners slowly and very loudly. And this works very well. Now, this angered my wife, but I don't think it's necessary. You lose so much, you lose so much of the charm of foreign travel if you speak the language. Take food, if you go to France. Eating in France, you sit on a table, simcars roaring past 6 inches from your toes, and there's a dimpled paper tablecloth held in place with chromium clips, and there's a menu in mauve ink, and it has a thing on it called amourette de veau. Amourette is what you go to France to eat. Something with a name like amourette. But only because you're ignorant, you see, because if you know French, amourette is boiled spinal marrow of veal. So the whole magic goes. Italy, doing the museums, feet swollen and frayed like a Guy Fawkes dummy, collapse in a restaurant, ossobuco. It doesn't matter what it comes, it sounds marvellous, but if you can speak Italian, you know it's a plate of boiled bones. Risotto. But, I can't wait for it to come. What is it? It's rice pudding with peas in it. For girls, love making. Athens. There you have, it is beach, midnight. The English girl is clasped in the arms of the Greek peddler attendant. His hands massage her clavicle in the way of a man with a maid. She sighs as the roughness of his fingers tickles her sunburn, and suddenly he murmurs what she's been hoping to hear. Splachnamou. Splachnamou. Marvellous, isn't it? You know what it means in Greek, don't you? My giblets. The magic evaporates when you know. That's why I do not speak any other language. My wife is furious. She wants me to speak French, you see, because she's half French. I will not. Well, the other night, yesterday actually, I was talking about this friend of mine, George Melly. You know him, he writes about pop culture, and he's the Observer TV critic. Well, I have lunch quite often with George, and he always insists on having a little walkie afterwards, you see. And I was telling my wife this, and she said, "Oh, he's a bit overweight, is he?" And I said, well, I don't know about that. And then she says that I said in French, "Evil be to he who evil thinks." I said, I don't speak French. She said, "But I heard you." I said, I did not say that in French. When you said, "Is he a bit overweight?" I said, "Well, I don't know about overweight, but on his walkie melly pants."
Well, ladies and gentlemen, by your vote, Frank Muir just wins this desperate contest of the two stories. And nevertheless, on the other side, Anne Scott James and Denis Norden win the entire contest, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, who also compiled the questions. The programme was devised by Tony Schreien and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. Here's round one, and for 2 marks, I want to know the meaning of the following words. We begin with Dilys Powell. What's the meaning of sternutation? S-T-E-R-N, like stern, and U-T-A-T-I-O-N. Sternutation. That's right. 2 marks.
Sneezing.
Means sneezing, the act of sneezing.
I thought the sternum was rather lower. I would have said that... well, forget it.
2 marks anyway. Denis Norden, what is a midinette? M-I-D-I-N-E-T-T-E. Midinette.
It's used by fishermen. It's a sort of calf-length net. But mainly, it's a girl who works in a shop in Paris, or used to work in a shop in Paris. It was a great feature of sort of Michael Arlen novels and things like that. And they were reckoned to be, somebody said you could call them like the chorus of a song because they were not a verse.
Well done, Dennis. Very full description. 2 marks. Parisian shop girl, particularly milliner's assistant, and probably because of the 2 words, midi meaning noon and dîner, which means a rather small dinner, they ate very quickly at lunchtime and were about on the streets during the dinner hour. 2 marks.
Not with much success.
And now Anne Scott James. The meaning of fescue. Fescue.
Ah, that's what one's tennis court, which is meant to be made of the finest grasses, is always full of.
Yes.
It's a rough, coarse grass.
Yes, that'll do. 2 marks. Frank Muir, what is a codpiece?
It's an article of gentleman's clothing.
Yes.
It's
We're not prepared to go any further.
Yes, I would describe it as a Renaissance Sassenach jockstrap.
Worn on the front of the breeches and prominent in Tudor times. That's certainly good enough for 2 marks. Well, before we begin round 2, I'm going to read out a quotation for each team to write down, and then I want the 2 women members to study those quotations, because at the end of the programme, I shall ask them where the quotations come from. Dilys, Powell and Frank Muir, your quotation is, "Believe it or not," and Anne, Scott, James and Denis, yours is, "Blood is thicker than water." And then in the last round of the programme, I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their idea of how these came to be said or written. Well, next a round of who, what, why, where questions. For 2 marks, can you tell me, Dilys Powell, what and where is Death Valley?
Death Valley is a desert.
Where?
In America.
Mm-hmm. Whereabouts, roughly?
Rather kind of southish. And in a film called Greed, the hero and his opponent both arrived there, and that's the end of them.
Yes, it's the end of quite a lot of people. It's a singularly inhospitable and completely waterless valley in California, so deep that it's about 280 feet below sea level. It was an appallingly dangerous bit that the frontiersmen, the Westerners, had to cross in order to try and colonize California, hence the name, Death. Denis Norden, where would you find the Kaaba, and what is it? K-A-A-B-A, Kaaba.
Kaaba is where the hydrates come from. They're also found in the dance macabre. The macabre is where the Scottish hydrates come from. I've never even seen the word. Actually, it's awfully useful in Scrabble if you get left with 3 A's.
It is. It's very good for that. Yes.
Make note. I really don't know. I haven't the faintest...
Now, it's at Mecca, and where Muhammad was born, and it's the sacred shrine of the Muslim religion which the pilgrims go to visit, which contains the black stone which the pilgrims kiss. And on Resurrection Day, the black stone will have 2 eyes, so as to recognize all those who've kissed it, and a tongue with which to praise Allah. Oh. So it's the center of the Mohammedan religion.
Thank you.
Anne Scott James, what and where are or were the Hanging Gardens?
Well, they were in Babylon. They were the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which are one of the 7 wonders of the world.
Quite right. And what were they like?
They were terraced. They were terraced gardens.
What were the Hanging Gardens, in fact? Why were they called Hanging Gardens?
Because it was a very flat place. It was at Babylon, next door to Nebuchadnezzar's palace. And Nebuchadnezzar had a wife who came from hilly country in Media, and she hated all this flat bit. And so he built up gardens on terraces up to 300 feet above the surface of the flat bit and watered them from cisterns from above. And that's why they're called the Hanging Gardens, because nothing like that had ever been seen before. And that's why, as Anne says, it was one of the 7 wonders of the world.
You're rather glad I asked, aren't you?
Well, yes, it came in a rather unexpected shape, as it usually does, Frank, that question. Now back to Frank Muir himself. Who, what, or where is Fernando Po? Fernando like Fernando, and Po like P-O-O.
Well, Fernando Po...
Yes, that'll do.
...is an island.
Yes.
It's a Spanish island off the coast of Africa.
Well done.
Well, no, I know that because the consul there his son was at prep school with my son. It was named after the Spaniard who discovered the island, Fernando Po, which is a translation of Fred Chambers.
Well, I can't beat that one. It's off the west coast of Africa, the bit called Rio Muni, and as Frank said, it does belong to Spain. In fact, the people who live there are treated as Spanish citizens. 2 marks. Next comes a round of differences. I want you to define the differences in meaning between the following pairs of fairly similar sounding words. Again, 2 marks each time. Dilys Powell, the difference between complacence and complaisance, A-C-E-N-C-E and A-I-S-A-N-C-E, complacence, complaisance.
Complacence means the condition of being rather satisfied with yourself.
Yes.
Complaisance means the condition of being rather agreeable to somebody else, ready to agree with something.
Yeah. Good, 2 marks it is. Denis Norden, ligature and ligament.
Oh, they're both a bit medical.
Yes.
Now, ligature is something that surgeons use professionally, not socially. I don't know, it ties up something. Quite what it ties up, I don't know.
Yes.
A ligament is a part of your body that you pull.
I pulled one once, and I've been staggering ever since.
I think 1.5. Ligature is a thing used in tying, and a band or a cord to tie up things like arteries when they get broken, or to strangulate a tumour, so on. A ligament is a short band of tough, flexible, fibrous tissue which binds bones together, or it can be any membrane keeping an organ in roughly the right position. Now on to Anne Scott James. Deprecate and depreciate.
What to deprecate means rather to apologise. Depreciate means what my shares do. It's quite simple, perfectly simple one. That just means
which you
running
deprecate.
down.
Yes, I think that's quite right for depreciate. Depreciate is to diminish in value or to lower the market price of, which is what I think Anne was saying, or to reduce the purchasing power, or to belittle. But to deprecate is to express a wish against, or to disapprove something, or to plead against it. You deprecate war, you deprecate panic, or hasty action, or something of that kind. Now, Frank Muir, gombeen and gombroon.
Thank you.
Gombeen, gombeen, and gombroon, B-R-O-O-N, gombeen, gombroon.
There's no difference. I don't know what either of them mean.
Yes.
Gombeen's a lad.
As a what?
A lad?
Yes.
Gombeen's a
It's a
lad.
lad. It's a
You
lad.
must be mad, woman.
It's a mad lad. It's a lad.
A gombeen is a mad lad.
It's a lad anyway. It's
Yes,
a
but
lad.
he has a particular trade. He is a chap.
He's a sort of...
He's gumless.
He's a roistering lad.
No, he's over the...
Over 40?
Over the channel in Ireland.
He's lad, yes.
It is.
Yes,
Isn't it?
it is
Didn't I
indeed.
say? Didn't I
Yes.
say just the
You
same
were
thing?
saying it yourself.
It's an Irish lad.
It certainly is. Right, half a mark so far. Gombroon, you're going to have a shot at that?
Gomboon isn't. Gomboon isn't an Irish lad. Otherwise there'd be no question, would there?
I don't think I'm going to get that. I'm going to give you half a mark. A gombeen in Anglo-Irish means usury, and a gombeen man is a moneylender, just quite straightforward. Gombroon is very different. It's a type of Persian pottery, which is imitated in Chelsea pottery, in certain types of Chelsea ware. Comes from the name of a town on the Persian Gulf. And now we come to the last round and go back to those quotations I gave the teams earlier in the programme. For 2 marks, Dilys Powell, can you give me the origin of your quotation, believe it or not?
There used to be a kind of, not exactly strip cartoon, but strip account of curious happenings which one didn't believe by somebody called Ripley.
Absolutely right. Well
Believe
done.
it or not.
That's right. Yes, I once gave my wife a bathrobe which had all these sort of coloured cartoons on it, and they were quite surprising. One was a cat fitted with spectacles, and the other was a fish that climbed trees, and there were even more dubious ones as well. 2 marks. Now, Anne Scott James, the origin of your quotation, blood is thicker than water.
She was expecting a mink, you know.
Every week you give me a proverb, and I'm sick of it. It's a proverb.
All right.
I don't think I can fault you. It was also the reply of an American naval officer who went to the rescue of some Englishmen in difficulty when they were in terrible trouble with the Chinese, and then he had to explain why he did this, and he said, blood is thicker than water. So but I think proverbially is quite good enough. 2 marks. Well, now I'm going to ask Frank and Denis to give me their explanations of how these quotations came into being. And for this round only, the marks will go to whichever improbable story receives the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So we go back to Frank Muir. Frank, believe it or not.
Brothers and sisters, I cannot tell you the change in the home of my good wife and myself since we were converted. It happened one morning, these 2 young men came to the door and said, "We are here to convert you." And I said, "Jehovah's Witnesses?" And he said, "No, North Thames Gas." I think I should explain to those unfortunate members living in this country who haven't yet been converted to North Thames Gas, and to our overseas listeners, that horrible old-fashioned, dreary natural gas that we've been flogging along on for the last almost 200 years is now being replaced by North Sea gas, which admittedly is more expensive and less efficient. But they hope, with a bit of luck, if it catches on, will bankrupt the National Coal Board. And all the appliances have to be converted to this when it comes to your district. We only had one piece of equipment, which was gas, which was a refrigerator. And these gentlemen adapted it and went away. So the following morning, the refrigerator went out. So we lit it and it went out. So I rang up the North Thames Gas, and the girl said, "Well, oh, Mr. Muir, yes, it's your gas fire, isn't it, in the kitchen?" So I said, no, it's a refrigerator. She said, "Oh, yes. Well, look, I'm awfully sorry, you do get these teething troubles. We'll get all the fitters are out at the moment. Would June do?" This was March. So I said, "Look, no, it won't, you know. The milk's going off and the kipper's gone phosphorescent." And she said, "Well, look, love." She said, "Now, have you got it? Have you got the fridge up as high as it'll go? You have to have it up as high as it'll go. Otherwise, the pressure isn't the same, and it'll go out." So I said, "Well, no, thank you very much." She said, "Right, I'll put the booking in for June." So I said to my good lady, I said, "The fridge has got to go up as high." I would like here to pay tribute to my wife. She's a frail girl. She wasn't feeling well. And there she had that fridge on her back. Well, I was urging the sideboard under it. We managed to wedge it up so that the fridge was as high as it could go. It was touching the ceiling. And the rubber tube was stretched so it was as thin as a bit of spaghetti. But the thing wouldn't light. So I rang up. "Hello, Mr. Muir." "Oh, it's your gas fire, isn't it?" "It's the fridge." She said, "Oh, yes." She said, "Well, your fridge might have a gas leak." She said, "Take the rubber pipe out at the back and make sure the gas is coming through." So I said, "Well, how do I make sure the gas is coming through?" She said, "Oh, strike a light." Now, what ensued was a very nasty experience. There wasn't a bang, there was sort of a whoosh, which singed half my moustache. I stood there semi-detached. And my wife said, "No, go and complain. The only thing is you're going to complain. You're always so polite. Go to the gas manager, beard him in his den if he's got a beard, and say you demand satisfaction. Get angry." She said, "The only way you can get his satisfaction is to be angry." So I went round to the gas showrooms and I marched into the office and I said, "Look here, gas manager, you're an incompetent fool. My refrigerator is not working." Well, all I can say is thank heavens the room was empty. He came in shortly afterwards and I said, "Now look," and I was really... He was rather a large man, and I was so frightened I sort of went white and trembled. And I said, "Look, about my refrigerator, it doesn't work. You've got to do something about it." I was really sort of livid with sort of fear and terror and afraid of going back to my wife. And he said, "Leave it to me, sir."
And the following day was Saturday. He said, we'll do something by tomorrow. And I said, well, we're going away, but we'll leave the house open. He said, right. We came back on Monday, and by golly, they had done something. They'd taken the old fridge right away, and there in its place, beautifully plumbed in, was a brand new gas fire. And there's a little note on it saying that we have credited you with £1.40 new pence, value in scrap of your old refrigerator. My wife was so proud of me. She says that would never have happened if you hadn't been strong with him. So what I say to you is, if you have these gas conversion things that are in trouble, you must not only be angry, but be white with fury, otherwise nothing happens. Or as Ripley says, be livid or naught.
Well, what a terrible saga. Now we go back to Denis Norden, and if you remember, his quotation was, blood is thicker than water.
I was thinking the other day how unfair it is that people make so much more fuss about Mother's Day than they do about Father's Day. To me, it's like ignoring the architect and honouring the building contractor. Because when you get right down to it, it is not mothers, it is fathers who children drive really raving berserk. Last week, on Woman's Hour, there was some idiot crone who said, what is a home without children? Well, I can tell that lady what a home is without children. It is tidy. Now, if there's a touch of frenzy in this statement, it's not because I regard tidiness as any kind of paramount virtue. It's because the reason for it is that I am approaching the age when the statistics for coronary attacks start climbing. And not long ago, when I went into my bathroom after a rather thick night, I very nearly became a statistic. Because there, hanging over the shower rail, was a thing crouching, reaching for me. I shrieked. No! What is that? My teenage daughter came running in. Easy now, old fella, she said. They have this way of talking to you as though that commandment read, humour thy father. Look, I said, pointing. It's poised to strike. Good Dad, she said, it's only my purple tights. Moving in the breeze. Purple tights, I sobbed. It's got a furry body. She said, I washed my hairpiece as well. It's like living with some crazed Red Indian warrior. And what is so peculiarly galling about it is what she attacks me for. Your generation, she says, has poisoned this planet. Oh, look, don't start, I say, please. I didn't touch it. And if I did, I'm sorry. Apathy, she says, is not enough. What my generation is pledged to do, we are going to clean up the environment. Good, I say, right. Start with your room. Now, I want to tell you about that room. It's like carnival night at the rubbish tip. Nobody is allowed to touch it. Leave it alone, she says. It may look untidy, but I know where everything is. Well, a few weeks ago, I snapped. I put my foot down in the one way that a determined father has left to exert authority. Bribery. Look, I said, here's £1. Now don't ever let me see your room looking like this again. And it worked. She took the money, and I have not seen her room looking like that since. She bought a padlock for the door. You can't beat them, and they won't let you join them. In the Generation War, I am now just another of the walking wounded. Or put it another way, Dad is thicker than daughter.
And by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Frank Muir wins the contest of the stories, but nevertheless the other team, Anne, Scott, James and Denis, win the entire contest, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, who also compiled the questions. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason, and presented by the BBC.
You've been listening to My Word from the BBC.